Welcome to the Wellness at Work podcast, brought to you by the Learning and Development Projects at Silberman School of Social Work, Hunter College. This is a series of conversations designed to inspire wellness in helping professionals. Our conversations will focus on understanding the importance of self-care, reducing trauma, and bringing to listeners new ideas and practices that promote wellness at work and in your professional life. Welcome to our show today.
Hi, my name is Geoff Rogers. I have been working in various aspects of adult abuse and elder abuse for way too long, probably longer than 35 years. I started in this work as a caseworker for Adult Protective Services. And I sort of progressed through, I think I had every job at New York City Adult Protective Services, a supervisor, a director of training, a director of special projects, a director of operations. And through the course of this work, I found myself really fascinated and interested about how we could uplift the health and the work and the knowledge of the work for people who are on the front lines of adult protective services, but more generally, people who serve vulnerable adults. So I progressed through this work at New York City Adult Protective Services, and then I left the New York City Human Resources Administration, and I came to Hunter College. More specifically, then it was the Brookdale Center for Healthy Aging. I now work for the Silberman School of Social Work also at Hunter College. I head up a small center here called the Learning and Development Projects at the Silberman School. Early in my tenure at Brookdale, somebody knocked on my door, and it turned out to be my good friend and colleague, Stacey Plichta. And it's kind of one of those interesting things where she said to me, I want to know more about elder abuse. And I was like, my reaction was more like, why are you asking me? Because I understand elder abuse from a practice perspective. And so I'll let Stacey talk about how we met and how we've worked together. But it has been this really fascinating collaboration with somebody, Stacey's a professor in the School of Public Health, and she's just like this brilliant theoretician, but she's also really good at sort of the translation from theory to practice. And Stacey, I'm going to stop there because I think I can overtalk this, and I want you to chime in here and sort of talk about how we came together and our shared interest.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I'm Stacey Plichta. I am a full professor of health policy and management at the CUNY Graduate School of Public Health and Health Policy. And meeting Geoff completely changed the trajectory of my research and my work. So from the beginning of my career, I was really interested in the effect that intimate partner violence, domestic violence, sexual assault had on the health and well-being of women. And I had spent, this is almost 30 years ago, I developed workshops, prevention workshops. I had worked with people, I'd worked with other faculty members and done advocacy. And a lot changed over the time I was working in intimate partner violence. A lot of the laws changed. A lot of really good things happened to keep women and families safer. And then I realized I had been focusing on younger women in relationships, but I knew nothing about older folks, both men and women. and the harm they were suffering from violence. Elder abuse had been in the news more, and I thought I wanted to expand my research and find out what, what is going on with the older folks in their country, what kinds of violence are they subjected to and who is protecting them. And that led me to Geoff's door. And so, I walk in, I'm like, hi, like, introduced myself. I was also at Hunter at the time, and we started talking. And the short version is he invited me to join him at a conference for training adult protective services workers up in Buffalo, New York. And I said I would love to go. And so I went thinking I would learn all about elder abuse and how I could use my research or my work to further to help protect older folks from violence. Well, I get there and I start talking to the workers, and I'm looking at them, and everybody looks unwell. Everybody looks pale and clammy and just not fit. It wasn't about being thin or fat. Folks just looked, and I talked to folks. So people would tell me about their work lives and their health, and they had headaches and stomach aches and back aches, and they were tired all the time. And they didn't have any time to really take care of themselves, and nobody understood what they did. And in part, they can't even talk about what they do because of confidentiality when they're not with other workers. They can't go take these home. And so I came to realize very quickly that what was really needed was a focus on the health of adult protective services workers and other folks who work with vulnerable populations. And so because I'm a researcher, I of course had a really good time at the conference. I thanked Geoff. I went home. I said, of course, there must be tons of research on this, right? These folks are clearly suffering. And there was literally 3 articles. That's it. There was no guidance. There were no white papers. There were no policies. There was a lot of work on elder abuse itself, but there wasn't anything about the workers. And so I went back to Geoff and I was like, hey, could we think about this together? And that was the start of our beautiful friendship and working relationship.
And it was so interesting because the meaning of the fact that there was nothing published didn't, it's sort of like it was this sort of dawning going in my head, but it was like, what does that mean? And so, Stacey's very intentional about her work. And so what I grew to understand is that we were sort of creating our own body of work in where there had been no work, which was an extraordinary experience for somebody who's for myself, because I'm really a practitioner. I have some insights into, but it was really, for me, an education in terms of understanding how policy and practice are come together. So I don't think I've ever said this to Stacey. It's kind of funny. Is that in a podcast, I said it. I was like, this was an amazing experience for me, but it was also daunting because it was like, well, she's really smart. Not really sure where she's going with this, and then all of a sudden she'd sort of pop up with questions and or a paper, and then she'd ask me to read it, and then I'd go, well, maybe this and maybe that, and then. And she's, oh, yeah, that's really good. And I'm like, oh, is it? So, so much about this work. And then I became more and more engaged with the idea of the health of the people who work with vulnerable adults. So Stacey, can we talk about what your thoughts were in terms of how we're going to do this, because you were really the leader in terms of understanding the importance of shaping a body of work.
Well, the first thing that hit me was that if there's no research about it, it means that there's no organized effort to help the folks doing the work. And that meant to me that there was a lot of people suffering out there. And my work in general really always focused on alleviating unnecessary suffering and pain, and the first thing we needed to do was to really understand exactly what is it that folks are facing. And so you very graciously agreed to we did surveys together at the annual meeting. We did surveys at meetings in New York City, and to try to get a sense of how are the workers doing? What are the health issues they face? There's research in related fields. So there's research about nurses, there's research about police officers and EMT workers. So we had somewhat of a base. There's some research about social workers, not a lot. So we developed a survey, if you remember, and we said, okay, let's look at their physical health. So we asked a lot of questions about physical and mental health, but we also asked about something called professional quality of life. And that's a concept that had been in the literature for a long time. And that really talked about three things. It talked about compassion fatigue, burnout, vicarious trauma, four things, and compassion satisfaction. And so we started measuring these things at the conference, and that helped us to really get a handle on where the adult protective services workers and others who worked with vulnerable adults were in terms of their health and professional quality of life.
So at some point, I think, and it's a bit of a blur for me, but I think at some point we actually had the attention of the New York City Adult Protective Services. And we did a comprehensive survey of the staff, but more significantly also of the managers and supervisors. I think if you could talk about the development of that process, and then also the importance or the role that supervisors play in supporting the health of the people who do this work on the front lines.
I'd love to. Let's take it in two pieces. So the first part, that was a great study. The New York City Adult Protective Services, they were wonderful. They welcomed us. We actually went to visit all of the sites to conduct the survey in person because we wanted a good response. And the best response rates are when you actually show up and show people you care. And we made sure the surveys, they were confidential, they were anonymous, we never collected identifying information, but we were able to gather this really good base. And in this base, we learned that their professional quality of life was suffering, their health was being impaired by their job. And we did ask, because we did find questions from a federal government survey that asked about the effect of supervisors and managers on worker functioning and worker satisfaction. Not quite, it was close, not quite. So we found that those folks who regarded their managers as supportive had fewer health problems. Those folks who regarded their managers as supportive, and there were clear definitions of that, had higher professional quality of life, that there was something protective about having a supervisor that had your back in shorthand, but in very concrete ways. And that we also found that the workplace characteristics mattered, and that those workplaces that made the workers feel supported, even beyond that of the individual supervisor, the workers also had better health and better professional quality of life.
So what you'll see here in subsequent, or you'll hear here, I should say, in subsequent podcasts, is that we're going to be examining various aspects of how the health of the workers who do this, the health of the people who do this, is so important to how we work with and serve people who are vulnerable and people who are at risk of abuse and exploitation. Stacey, do you think you could? We're going to end here, but it'd be great if you could sort of take us through an example of an exercise that would help support the work.
So for an individual?
For an individual, yeah, absolutely.
So one of the challenges with the work that adult protective services workers do, well, there's two parts. The first is that every day they're faced with somebody who's living in a terrible situation, who's living in a nightmare of some sort. But they don't know what that is. And there's a huge uncertainty. Some days it might be a problem that's easily solved. Some days it might be a horrific situation that will take a lot of time and effort to untangle. And some days, no matter what they do, they might not be able to really help the client a lot. And so the important thing is to be able to, so the idea is to give people a chance to be empathetic in the moment. That's what makes adult protective services workers so good at what they do. They have the empathy, they have the compassion. But to have that in the moment and to not carry the burdens of the other people with them once they're not with the client. And so, similar to a physician or a nurse washing their hands between patients, there are short breathing exercises that can be done that can help somebody kind of break what can feel like a rising tension and stress, which is perfectly natural from helping somebody in crisis, so that the worker can reset themselves. And one of these things, and we'll be sharing a number of them through our broadcast, it's called the 4-7-8 breath. And how it works is, this is a breath that I learned from Dr. Andrew Weil, who's one of the founders of integrative medicine in the United States. He works at the University of Arizona, founded the Center for Integrative Medicine. And this breathing exercise is very simple, but very effective. So I'll ask you to do it with me, and perhaps our listeners.
Absolutely.
All right. I will talk you through it, and then we'll do it twice over. So the first thing that you do is you would belly breathe in for 4 counts, really deep breath.
Okay.
Then you're going to hold it for 7. And then putting your tongue right behind your teeth, you're going to kind of whoosh it out for 8. Now, the challenge here, when people first do that, is they whoosh out the breath really fast. And then they're like, they can't get to 8. So you want to pace the whooshing out, if you will.
Okay.
So, and also the 4-7-8 should be at a pace that's comfortable for folks at home. So if my counting, you're feeling like you can't breathe, shorten it. It's the ratio that matters, not the actual length. If you think I'm going like too fast and you could hold for longer, then lengthen it.
Okay.
Just keep that 4-7-8. So let's go ahead and start. Are you ready?
I am.
All right. So you want to breathe in for 4, 3, 2, 1. Now hold for 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Put your tongue behind your teeth and whoosh it out for 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, shoulders down, 3, 2, 1.
Oh,
So how was that?
that was something. It's funny, the people listening to this can't see how when you said my shoulders came down. So that was also like that release. That was significant. This is great. I want to take a nap now, but you know. So Stacey, the last segment you took me through a breathing exercise, and it was significant because it sort of brought back my memory of my first visit as a caseworker for New York City Adult Protective Services. So it was a visit to the upper reaches of Manhattan. This was a case of a client who was at risk of eviction. And we arrived at this building that I believe was off of Broadway and like 170th Street, 160th Street. I don't remember the exact address anymore. And we walked up to it was a walk up, and we walked up. It was on the second floor of this older building, and there was this strange smell as we came to the door of the apartment that the client lived in. Um, we knocked, and after a while, somebody came to the door, and I was shadowing another caseworker, and so they were starting their engagement process in terms of identifying themselves and sort of making sure that we were talking to or that he was talking to the client. And when we came in, it was the middle. It was kind of around 11 o'clock, so it was like 11 o'clock in the morning, and it was a very sunny day. But all the shades, curtains in the apartment were drawn, and there were all these people sleeping on couches and chairs, and there's this pungent smell. And I understand now that the smell was the smell of crack, and that these folks were all people who used crack. And so, having not really had any sort of context for this, it reminds me about how, we subsequently, when you and I started to work together, I had a greater understanding of compassion fatigue, for example, and then burnout. And I was wondering if, for the folks who are listening, if you could define those terms, and then within the context of how, when people are doing this work, when they're serving the vulnerable adults, what's the context and what's the impact?
Wow, that was some introduction to adult protective services work.
And you got to still remember it, and I had to say, it was about 35 years ago.
And it stayed with you.
Yes.
But this is a great illustration of why people who do this work are at such high risk of compassion fatigue, of burnout, of secondary trauma, because there are two factors. It's unpredictable. You were not expecting to walk into a crack house that day, where there's an older person who's clearly vulnerable, with, I'm assuming, other people taking advantage of them. And you were not expecting, that the person's situation, they're about to be evicted, is stressful for them, but it evokes compassion. It's a very scary thing to be losing your home. So compassion fatigue and burnout are occupational hazards because this wasn't just your first client visit. I am sure things like this happened over and over throughout your career, just as other adult protective services workers encounter very stressful situations randomly beyond their control. So this repeated combination of absorbing and internalizing the traumatic emotions of others, plus the day-to-day life. Everybody has their own life and their own families and most folks in this age range have some kind of caregiving with elders, with children, on top of all of that. And so, so different things can happen. So there are really four things I wanted to define to get us started. The first is burnout. So burnout doesn't happen on your first time out, right? Burnout is a weariness. It's overwhelming weariness and feeling hopelessness and inefficient in the face of sort of repeated cases over and over, in which workers may start to feel they're not that effective anymore. So burnout has a gradual onset. Compassion fatigue is different. And this is when you simply stop caring because you don't have the capacity to care. Your battery is on empty. And that can happen for many reasons, largely because being exposed, again, constantly to other people's trauma, absorbing that trauma, And not having a way to recharge can lead to compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue is strongly related to secondary trauma or vicarious trauma. Our brains are where we live, and I know that sounds trite, but when we think about somebody else's trauma, it's as if we're reliving it ourselves.
Hmm.
And so if you think about on the positive side, how like really famous sports figures will talk about rehearsing their game before they play,
Hmm.
rehearsing how they're going to ski down the slope or how they're going to, execute a play in football or basketball or how they're going to do something in gymnastics. They do this in their head and it becomes very real.
Hmm.
Well, when we relive the trauma of others over in our head, it's as real to us almost as it is to them, and we get some of the same physical symptoms. And so that sort of reliving of someone else's trauma, and not necessarily feeling paired with not feeling that we've been horribly effective, can really lead to compassion fatigue when there's no way to recharge. The other concept here is compassion satisfaction, and that really is the antidote to compassion fatigue. And compassion satisfaction is the pleasure that we derive from helping others. It has a biological basis in stress relief, and we can dive into that later, the whole biology of stress and of relaxation. But the bottom line is there's a lot of research that supports that people are altruistic by nature. We want to help others. People that go into helping professions are even more so. So we go into it both wanting to help others and experiencing pleasure that we should be experiencing from giving that help. When the ability to feel that pleasure is impaired, that's when compassion fatigue can set in. Um, and what it looks like is it can compassion fatigue, and as well as burnout can look like unclear thinking and hopelessness.
Hmm.
It can look like negative emotions, becoming really pessimistic and cynical and irritable, easy to anger. It can lead to numbness, being emotionally detached, and that numbness can carry over into folks' personal lives.
Hmm.
Almost every worker I've ever talked to has that client that they brought home with them. That while they
Hmm.
were making dinner for their family, they're thinking about that client. While they're watching a movie with the kids, they're thinking about that client. And when that starts to take over, people start detaching. Um, People become demoralized. They start questioning their own effectiveness. And then they get stress-related physical and mental health problems. And so that's what it looks like. Now, briefly, if it starts to look more severe than that, so sometimes from this work, people can get post-traumatic stress disorder. And that is not something that you can cure with self-care. That requires a professional. So
Hmm.
if folks find themselves hyper aroused, always on the alert, always looking for danger, if they find themselves having intrusive thoughts of and flashbacks to clients, not simply remembering something, but it coming unwelcome thoughts about a client's situation and thinking about them and feeling it, not just thinking about it. And then if folks find themselves avoiding things, shutting down, avoiding people,
Hmm.
places, and events that remind them of the traumatic event, those are all symptoms of PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder, and those require a professional.
So, Stacey, so a lot of us like to think that we're strong,
Mhm.
and um, maybe this compassion fatigue may be happening to other people who are not as strong as I am. But how does that mentality factor in or impact the recognition of what you're talking about?
Well, first, I want to acknowledge that you are strong. And the people that do this work are absolutely strong. It takes strength to do this. It
Hmm.
takes internal fortitude to do this.
Hmm.
Do it every day. I spent one day as part of trying to learn more about what folks do. You had very kindly paired me with an adult protective services worker. I shadowed her for one day and went home and collapsed. It was exhausting. And she got up and did it the next day.
That's
I went
right.
back to my computer and wrote a paper. It's like, and so I would say the strength is there, but one of the symptoms of compassion fatigue is denying there's a problem. because we don't want to see it. And
Hmm.
what that does is not, it doesn't mean you're weak if you're experiencing a normal physical response to stress.
Right.
So, if people, and as burnout as well, so if you find yourself becoming the toxic worker, because ultimately
R-
that's what can happen. Either people withdraw
hmm.
or they express their angst outwardly with
Is
anger
that usually
and
anger?
negativity. Anger with not always, especially with women. Women are socialized to not experience anger directly, to not
Hmm.
express anger. Doesn't mean women don't, but less likely. So it can be anger. It can be self-loathing. It can be feeling like I don't know how to do
Hmm.
this. I'm no good at my job. I'm not competent. After doing something well for 20 years, if you suddenly start to feel not competent, or 10 years or 5 years, that's a red flag. And so
Hmm.
the denying there's a problem is really normal. But if you feel yourself becoming detached and not enjoying your work, and again, either being outwardly snappy or just withdrawing and
Hmm.
becoming non-responsive, those are all signs that there is a problem and it's important to address it.
Right. And saying it's important to address it is also, it's having a negative effect on the people that we're trying to serve.
It has a negative effect on everybody.
Right.
I believe in put on your own oxygen mask first. So it has a negative effect on
Mm.
you as a worker. It has a
Hmm.
negative effect on your coworkers, and it very much will have a negative effect on your clients because you won't be able to serve them as well if you're detached and not feeling empathy and compassion.
Right. So if we, for the folks who are listening to this, are there some exercises that we can sort of end the segment with that, or an exercise that they can undertake that can help to address compassion fatigue or burnout?
So there's a number of things, and for this one, I'd like to point to not a specific exercise we can do here, but something that folks can do on their own.
Okay.
So mindfulness is really important. So mindfulness, all of these words around wellness became very commercialized and jargony. Mindfulness is very simply living in the moment.
Hmm.
And so it's important for folks to have things to do that they enjoy outside of work, that they're really focusing on. So my best example is you can be mindful with chocolate. It doesn't have to be yoga. It doesn't have to be meditation. How many of us just eat by like shoving the food in our mouths and nom, 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 like chewing really quickly and it's gone, right? A mindfulness exercise you can do with chocolate, and we'll do it here. We'll just imagine it. Imagine you have a piece of your favorite chocolate. Could be Dove, could be Hershey's, could be Godiva. Um, Imagine taking one bite of it and really focus on what you're doing. What does that bite feel like? That, when you bite into the chocolate and it's like a little hard, but it yields to your teeth. And you get that first taste of creaminess and sweetness. And if you like dark chocolate, you might get that hint of bitter as well. And then what
Hmm.
does it feel like as the chocolate is melting on your tongue and going to your taste buds? And then and you're getting the full effect of the chocolate flavor, and then you swallow that first piece, and then you take the second bite, and again, you get that creaminess and that richness and, that like full fat sensation with the sweetness, maybe a touch of bitter if you're like me and like the dark chocolate, with, you know, and you chew it a few times and you really think about the mouthfeel and the tastes and staying
Mm.
totally focused with that piece of chocolate until it's gone. That's mindfulness.
Wow. And
And you
it has like a sensual quality to it. It's really interesting.
absolutely, the more senses you can involve in whatever mindfulness activity you choose, the better. So if people like to craft, crocheting, or they
Hmm.
like to journal, or they like to cook, the key is to be focused. And I'm not talking about cooking something you've cooked 1,000 times while you're watching TV and getting your
Hmm.
kids to do their homework. And, I'm talking about like cooking something that you really are just focusing on the act of cooking and enjoying, that
Mm.
you're measuring the ingredients, you're getting your mise en place, right? Getting all your stuff set out in advance.
Hmm.
You're thinking about how it's going to taste. You're, following the directions. You're mixing in the first things. Like, let's say, if you're making bread, you're putting like the water and the sugar and the yeast, and you're watching the
Hmm.
yeast proof and so on.
Hmm.
Whatever it is that you're doing,
Hmm.
to really be there with it. And
Yeah.
that's one
Yeah.
of those things that's protective.
That's amazing. Thank you. So, Stacey, wellness at work. We've been talking a lot about the different aspects of it. Can you talk a little bit about stress and the mind?
Oh, absolutely. So, stress is our body's physical reaction to what we would call a stressor.
Hmm.
So, for adult protective services workers, they face all kinds of stressors every day. They face physical hazards. They can walk into a hoarding situation or a incredibly unclean and hazardous environment or an environment with a bug infestation. They face mental health hazards, like having someone yell at them, being physically threatened, or even being physically harmed, which is both
Hmm.
physical and mental health. They also face vicarious trauma hazards. Seeing other people's hardships every day is difficult, and sometimes there are cases that are so terrible that a worker simply can't get the case out of their mind, and they take that person home with them.
Hmm.
So when our bodies encounter a stressor, which is
Hmm.
anything that stresses you out, um, it sounds the alarm in our brain. And one of the things I really would love our listeners to take home is that stress isn't in your mind, it's in your brain. A lot of times people think, oh, they should just shrug it off. They shouldn't let it bother them. They're weak if it bothers them. The stress response begins in the brain and it's an autonomic response. So the autonomic nervous system is the same one that controls our breathing and our heart rate and our
Hmm.
temperature. Nobody walks around thinking 98.6. I got to stay at 98.6. Nobody walks around thinking, okay, heart, beat, beat. Our brain just does this stuff for us, right? It's
Right.
automatic. The stress response is just as automatic. And so for people to feel weak or bad about it makes no sense.
Hmm.
So begins in the brain,
Hmm.
and our brain sounds the alarm. We encounter a stressor. Um, Somebody walks, like goes to see a client or a potential client, and they're met with a torrent of emotional and verbal abuse. That's a stressor.
Hmm.
Our body sounds the alarm. Now, have you heard of fight, flight, and freeze?
Yes.
Right. So our body has one of three reactions to stress. There's actually a fourth one that we don't talk about a lot, and I'll go into that. The first one is fight. So our body, when we're confronted with the stressor, we get ready to fight, we get ready to run away,
Hmm.
or we freeze. And this all comes from evolution.
Hmm.
Sometimes the smartest thing to do, if you've ever seen like a rabbit or a squirrel freeze, they're trying to be invisible. They're trying to not be seen. There's also fawning. So when people get stressed out, if they've had a history of trauma at work or at home, they tend to become people pleasers and will engage in behaviors to appease whoever or whatever is stressing them out.
So fawning, fawning,
Mhm.
fawning.
Yes.
Very, and you sort of touched on that. Where's the connection between stress and trauma? Where does,
Well,
hmm.
by definition, traumatic events, not all stressful events are traumatic,
Okay.
right? But if somebody cuts me off in traffic, it's stressful, but it's not, for example, it's not, if no one got hurt, it's probably not traumatic. Um, but all traumatic events are stressful. And
Ah.
part of the challenge with traumatic events is they typically create chronic stress, which means our body is always in this fight, flight, freeze, or fawn state. Because remember, it's a physical response. The autonomic nervous system has two parts. We've got the sympathetic, and that's responsible for all of that fight, flight, freeze, fawn reaction. And we have the parasympathetic, which we'll talk about later, which is responsible for calming us down and being relaxed. And so it's also an inflammatory process. That's another one of those words that became jargony in the wellness world. But if we think of inflammation, it's also a physical response. So if you cut yourself, what happens at the cut?
You bleed.
Right, you bleed, but also it turns red. It's not infected, but it'll feel hot. Not just you bleed, but lymph fluid will come. So that's inflammatory, right? So all of these things happen to help us heal. And it's not always bad. You want an inflammatory response if you cut yourself. So what happens when we are confronted with a stressor? We get this system-wide inflammatory response. So we get ready to act in some way, one of those four. So our pupils dilate. We stop salivating. Our digestive system shuts down. So if your stomach hurts or you find yourself getting stopped up or, the other way around, when you're stressed, it's because when your body's in fight, flight, freeze, fawn mode, everything that's not necessary to your immediate survival stops working. Our heart rate increases. Our breathing increases. And so we're breathing fast. We're ready to act. Because our brain is a one-trick pony. There's only one stress response. And whether it's a physical threat like a wolf jumping out at us trying to kill us, or a threat to our mental health, like somebody yelling at us and being emotionally abusive, our brain will react the same exact way.
So when you're on alert, is that the constant sense of being alert how does that translate?
All right. So we want a short-term stress response, right? So it's not that all stress is bad, and it's not that all stressors are not bad. So how it works is, so when you're on alert, again, it's physical. And I think for our listeners, if next time you feel stressed, pay attention to your body. We tend to disconnect everything below the neck from everything above. Right? So if you're feeling stressed, okay, what's happening? Are your shoulders up by your ears?
Right.
Are you clenching your jaw? Are you breathing faster? Does your stomach hurt? Are you, is your heartbeat racing? Because all those things are the physical things that happen. And they happen because when the stress response hits, our brain floods our body with chemicals that make it react. So you think of epinephrine, norepinephrine, adrenaline, cortisol, and that's what happens. In the short term, we need that response. So if I'm going to cross the street and a car comes barreling down, I want to be quicker so I can jump out of the way.
Right.
The problem is when you're always in that state, when the brain is always sounding the alarm, when that alarm never shuts off. So when we're constantly in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn mode, our body gets worn out because we weren't meant to be at the ready all the time.
So when it's worn out, what does that look like?
It looks like a lot of things. It looks like depression and anxiety. It looks like work avoidance. It looks like poorer physical health. It looks like metabolic disorders. It looks like overweight and obesity. It looks like diabetes. It looks like high blood pressure. It looks like cardiovascular events and stroke. It looks like autoimmune disorders. It looks like, think psoriasis, lupus.
Oh, wow.
It looks like digestive disorders.
Wow.
It looks like, anything having to do, it looks like acid reflux. It looks like,
sleeplessness.
It looks like muscle tension. It looks like back pain and neck pain and joint pain.
Wow. Okay. So let's see if we can sort of talk about some practices that we can leave folks with that would help to address some of the aspects of stress that we've been talking about.
So the question of what do we do about, encountering stressors and the stress response is a really important one. And it'll take me a minute to unpack it.
Okay.
So the first thing is to be aware that we're stressed.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times, especially for people who are chronically stressed or who are coming into the workplace with trauma from somewhere else. So they're carrying a level of distress and stress with them all the time. Um, Step one is to recognize it.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's only after we recognize it that we can take an action about it.
I see.
So very briefly, the way we shut off the stress response is to kick off the relaxation response. So have you heard of rest and digest?
I have, only from you, though.
Okay, yeah. So most people have it. We've all heard of fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. But rest and digest is that other half of our autonomic system. So relaxation, shutting off that alarm, is just as biological as
Mm-hmm.
is the stress response. We have a relaxation response. And so the idea when we're trying to de-stress, we want to kick off that relaxation response, and we can talk more about the details of it later.
Mm-hmm.
So the first step in de-stressing oneself is to recognize that you're stressed. And here's an exercise that can help with that. So most of us, when we're stressed, we feel it. So
Mm-hmm.
where do you feel your stress physically when you start getting stressed?
In my shoulders and probably my lower back.
So when your shoulders start hurting, I
Mm-hmm.
remember in the breathing exercise, I did tell you to get your shoulders down, right? When your
Right.
shoulders start hurting, when you feel your lower back, that's like a physical clue that
Mm-hmm.
something's going on. So for
Mm-hmm.
me, it's my stomach. When I feel stressed, I feel the anxiety kind of rising up from my midsection about to flood my body. It's all really coming from the brain, but I feel
Mm-hmm.
it first there, you
Mm-hmm.
feel it first. So knowing where you feel the stress and the signs that you're becoming stressed is important. And what you can do is take a pause. It will feel like it's longer in your head. The person who's across from you will just experience it as you've stopped to catch your breath for a minute. And you
Mm-hmm.
can ask yourself, how am I feeling right now? That's called metacognition. When we can break the mind body connection by asking the mind to examine itself, we can start to break the stress response. Because simply the act of stepping back from your own physical response and assessing yourself, wow, I'm feeling stressed. My shoulders really hurt. My back hurts. I feel that anxiety rising. I feel my jaw clenching.
Mm-hmm.
However, I feel a headache. However, folks experience it, everyone's physicalness will be different. Um,
Right.
and then to be able to look at the other person or whatever is causing you stress, the stressor, which is likely to be another human being in human services, and to say, wow, they seem really upset right now,
Mm-hmm.
or they seem blank, or they're in a really bad place right now, or they're really hurting. So to acknowledge those things in your head, in our head, and to break that physical reaction.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
that's like the first step.
and are you talking about verbalizing it or just
And
recognizing it?
well, if you're faced with another person in the moment, it's just doing it inside your head.
Right.
And even if you have to say, I need a moment to think about this,
Uh,
whatever it takes for that
uh,
moment, if it becomes a regular practice, you'll be able to do it really quickly, that
mm-hmm.
self-assessment, and you won't even, because we think a lot faster than we talk usually, so
Right.
once it's a habit, until it's a
Right.
habit, you might have to say, give me a second here. Yeah.
Right.
And then the first thought should be, how am I feeling? Not the other person, because you
Mm-hmm.
recognize your own stress.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a number of things that you can do, but step one is to cut that connection between your physical reaction. And then after that, a short breathing exercise can help, and it's
Okay.
something, and even if it's something where you just slow your breathing so the other person doesn't necessarily know it, where if you find yourself part of the stress response is breathing fast.
Oh, interesting.
But breathe in slowly for 4, breathe out slowly for 4. And there are lots of other things we can do to kick off that relaxation response when we're not right with the other person. But in
Mhm.
that moment, the recognition is key.
Oh, that's really interesting. So, can you take us through an exercise?
Um, sure. So I'll take you through one that you might want to do either before or after you've seen someone, or if you've been on the phone a long time.
Hmm.
So lots of things cause stress. And, a lot of folks do a lot of their work at the computer, right? Filling it, or on the phone, which means we're doing what? We're sitting at a desk
Right.
and it could be for hours. So sitting is kind of like the new smoking. Sitting for 8 hours is not quite as bad as smoking, but close.
Oh,
And
wow.
so, yeah, because our bodies were never meant to be still for that long. We're meant to be in motion. And so one of the things that can kick off that relaxation response is exercise.
Hmm.
And again, all of it is about mindfulness. So it's exercise that you're paying attention to.
Right.
Like so this is an exercise that's easy to do at your desk. Especially if you're sitting for a while, it's important to get up once an hour,
Okay.
to break that. And so, like I said, this is something once you're away from the person and before you come, so stand up.
I am standing.
Okay. And then put your hands by your side,
Uh-huh.
and then slowly start twisting. And I'll talk about ways you can adapt this for folks who might not be comfortable standing or moving their
Hmm.
arms. And as you're twisting, though, let your arms go, looser and looser but don't force the twist. It should be a natural, relaxed twist.
Hmm.
You can even add breathing to it, so you could breathe in on one side, out on the other. Breathing in, breathing out. Breathing in, breathing out. And just about 30 seconds of this is really enough. But for now, you just kind of wind it down slowly. So, slow down your twisting, slow down your breathing, and then come back to like a standstill. And then notice how you feel.
Oh,
So, how do you
I,
feel?
I want to take a nap.
Okay. Right. And that is the relaxation response. So, yeah. Now, not everybody can stand so easily.
Hmm.
So the more important thing is mindful movement. So if standing is not possible for someone, if you're able to twist in your seat, you can do the
Hmm.
sitting. If
Hmm.
that's not comfortable, you can do shoulder rolls, so rolling your shoulders back and
Hmm.
forward. Um, you know, the main thing is to move. And
Right.
if you
Right.
can stand, to stand, because that makes a big difference. But if you can't stand, to move your body in whatever way is comfortable and safe for you to do so.
Because I was thinking about some of our listeners are probably driving for long periods of time, and so this
Right.
is essentially
It's
sitting.
sitting. It's the same
Yeah.
thing.
Interesting.
So
That's.
this is so this is something that you could do when you get out of the car before you go in,
Hmm.
or when you're done.
Hmm.
It can help a lot to have a kind of break between clients so that you're not carrying the stress and the impact of one client to your next client.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
again, anything that breaks that, first being aware, and then second doing something, a breathing exercise, a motion exercise to address it.
That's really great. I think we have some really, really great information.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure.